In 1961, Pablo Casals, one of the music world's greatest cellists, was guest of honor at a concert of 400 Suzuki children at Tokyo's Bunkyo Hall. Addressing the audience, he said, as he wept,
"I am witness to one of the most moving scenes that one can see. I feel such proof of heart here, of desire of a better world. How wonderful to see grown-up people think of the smallest like these, to teach them to begin life with noble feelings, with noble deeds. Perhaps it is music that will save the world."
These are the Suzuki children, trained from infancy to hear and feel the most sublime sounds. They are imbued with faith in themselves and in life. They wake to music, hear it throughout the day, and are cradled by it at night. Music becomes their language, spoken with the joy of accomplishment, nurtured by love. In 1929, at age 31, while playing with his Suzuki Quartet, Shinichi Suzuki thought of something so obvious no one gave it a second thought. Infants of every nationality utter the same sounds, yet in a few years, each masters the intricacies of the mother tongue. This revelation led Suzuki to explore the potential of environment. In the beginning, his first students shared one tiny violin. Today, Dr. Suzuki's teaching methods have indelibly touched hundreds of thousands of families throughout the world.
Well, in 1958, I went to an American String Teachers Association meeting at Oberlin. And following the meeting, one of the teachers at Oberlin brought in a Japanese pre-ministerial student who was there, and he said, "This young man has a film from Japan which he'd like to show. Would you like to see it?" So three of us, Clifford Cook, Robert Klotman, and I, looked at this film, which showed about 750 Japanese children playing the Bach double concerto together. And as an old veteran string teacher, I was quite skeptical, and I asked him many questions about it. And he said, "Well, if you believe these children aren't doing what they seem to on the film, why don't you go to Japan and find out, because no American teacher has been there so far." So in 1959, I took a trip to Japan. I guess one tends to remember first experiences, but when I got off the plane at Haneda Airport and drove into Yokohama, I was greeted at the door by about 275 children playing the Vivaldi G minor concerto. And of course, I have to say, the tears just came to my eyes. I mean, I couldn't believe the sound I was hearing. And I was used to teaching violin and hearing the somewhat scrubby sounds of beginning mixed string classes in this country, and that sound was unforgettable.
Suzuki spent many years developing his theories on talent education. He describes his method as
a fledgling nightingale is taken from the nest of wild birds and placed in the company of a master bird. He listens to the warbling of the master bird, and within a month he is singing just as beautifully. So it is with children.
Obviously, kids all over the world learn to speak, even though there isn't any book which says these are the 5 steps that you need in order to be able to speak. Indeed, it's almost impossible to prevent them from learning how to speak. In fact, if kids live in a culture where there are 2 or 3 languages, they'll pick them all up. And indeed, if the mother only speaks one language and the aunt only speaks another, they'll direct the language appropriately to those 2 people. I'm sure many people through the history of the world have hypothesized that you could learn other things the way you learn language, if you're bathed in it, if it's part of a natural intercourse among people. But the difference with Suzuki is he took this idea very seriously.
When he researched this himself, he began to really pinpoint the steps that go into language learning. And he discovered some very specific things which he then incorporated into the approach for teaching the violin. It's really a very simple procedure that goes on the way children learn to speak.
Suzuki's mother tongue method uncovered a direct correlation between language learning and talent education. As with speech, music learning begins at a very early age when the mind is most receptive. Young children naturally possess an insatiable thirst for learning, which has the potential to develop into great ability. Talent education, just like language development, is dependent on parental involvement. Early on, the parent learns to play the instrument along with the child, stimulating the child's desire to imitate. As the child's desire to play grows, parental support and praise remain critical to the child's overall development. In a spoken world, the sights and sounds of the surrounding environment motivate children to produce their own sound. Shaping the environment with music is equally essential in developing the child's desire to create music. The process of creating any sound relies on developing the ear. This underscores the importance of listening to music while learning to play. For instance, Suzuki students regularly listen to expert recordings and are encouraged to imitate what they hear. The success of these concepts lies in the understanding that all children can learn. This concept is grounded in the belief that all children, not just the talented, or those genetically gifted, or the musically inclined, but all children can learn. In 1853, Japan's 250 years of isolation was shattered by American warships in Tokyo Bay. Under the orders of U.S. President Millard Fillmore, Commodore Matthew Perry forcibly opened Japan's doors to worldwide navigation and trade, closing the era of Japan's feudal social and political system forever. In 1868, a new leadership emerged under the young Emperor Meiji. This period, known as the Meiji Restoration, was the beginning of the modernization of Japan. Politically, intellectually, culturally, and militarily, Japan would seek to grasp the new world with a single embrace. Art was to become one of the most compelling and exciting imports to Japan. European artists who had long been influenced by Japanese woodblock prints reciprocated by bringing to Japan Western recording technology, and for the first time, the Japanese were able to hear the works of Europe's master composers: Bach, Mozart, Beethoven, Verdi, Wagner. These powerful new sounds stirred great new emotions. From the time of his great-grandfather, Suzuki's family worked at home making the traditional shamisen, a three-stringed banjo-like instrument. But his father, Masakichi Suzuki, was fascinated by the violin. One day he borrowed a violin overnight and made drawings of it. And in 1888, he made his first violin. And from that beginning, he was to build the largest violin factory in Japan. Shinichi Suzuki was born in 1898 in Nagoya, Japan, and as a boy, he viewed the violin factory as just another playground.
Suzuki tells the story about he and his brothers who used the violins as bats for playing ball. And that was the first time he realized that there was any importance to the instrument. And so when Suzuki first heard a violin, he heard a recording of Misha Elman, which so thrilled him that he had to go out to the factory and get a violin and try it.
In his book, Nurtured by Love, Suzuki writes, "The first record I bought was Schubert's Ave Maria, played by Misha Elman.
sweetness of Elman's violin was like something in a dream. I was enthralled. My soul was moved. I brought a violin home from the factory and tried to imitate Elman. I had no score. I simply moved the bow, trying to play what I heard. I did this day after day. And finally, with great perseverance, I learned to play.
When Shinichi Suzuki was 20, he met a gentleman who was once a schoolmate of the Marquis of Tokugawa, a direct descendant of the Tokugawa shogun. Suzuki was invited to join the Marquis's biological research team. He took along his violin, and together with renowned pianist Nobu Koda, they gave evening concerts for the Marquis and his research team. The Marquis invited Suzuki on a year-long tour of the world. Then fate handed him the opportunity to fulfill his most ardent wish, to study the violin in Germany. Barely turned just 22, Suzuki's life was about to make a sudden and dramatic turn. World War I had left Germany in chaos. Its people faced hunger and catastrophic inflation. But rising above it was Berlin, the cultural mecca of Central Europe. Music was one of the crowning glories of 1920s Berlin. There were 3 opera houses plus the Berlin Philharmonic. Among older musicians like Busoni, there were emerging young stars: Fritz Kreisler, Rudolf Serkin, Bruno Walter, Otto Klemperer, Arthur Schnabel, and Alban Berg. While in Berlin, Suzuki went to concerts virtually every day. He once wrote,
I went to hear everybody from famous performers to young artists, looking for someone of whom I could say, this is the man I want for a teacher.
Just as he was at the point of moving on to Vienna, he attended the Klingler Quartet concert at the Sing Academy. In Karl Klingler, a student of the great German violinist Joseph Joachim, Suzuki found the spirituality he was looking for.
I heard the Klingler Quartet play Mozart, and something very strange happened to me. I seemed to be drawn into Mozart's spirit. I was not conscious of anything, not even my own being. Sublime, ecstatic joy had taken over my spirit. Through sound, I had gone beyond the limits of my physical being. Without introduction, and in English, I hadn't yet learned German, I wrote Klingler a note. Please, take me as your pupil.
During his study with Karl Klingler, and now under the wing of his German benefactor, Dr. Leonor Michaelis, Suzuki entered the cosmopolitan world of Berlin's social life. But Michaelis would leave Germany because of the rising tide of anti-Semitism. So he entrusted the care of young Suzuki to a personal friend, Dr. Albert Einstein. A violinist himself since the age of 6, Einstein would soon include Suzuki among his circle of friends. At a dinner party one evening, Suzuki was asked by Einstein to play. After listening to him play the Bruch Concerto, an elderly lady remarked, "I really can't understand it. Suzuki grew up in Japan in a completely different environment. In spite of that, his performance clearly expressed to me the Germanness of Bruch. Is such a thing possible?" Dr. Einstein replied, "Madam, people are all the same." On another occasion, a piano recital, Suzuki met Waltraud Prange, a beautiful 17-year-old Fraulein from a prominent musical family.
In one of these home concerts we met. He was invited, I was invited, and Suzuki was there. And then he said, could he take me home? And I thought, well, yes. So then he took me home and he said he wants to meet my family. And I told him, well, my father is deceased, but he is welcome to meet my mother, brother and sister. And so he came the very next day. And then he came very, very open, you see. And we had home concerts too. My brother played the violin, my sister piano, and I was singing. So Suzuki liked that very much.
During their courtship, Waltraud and Shinichi went to concerts together almost every night and were serenaded by some of the world's greatest musicians.
Our whole family liked him very, very much, you see. And after 5 years, when we decided to get married, you know, my mother was, in a way she was pleased, in another way she was very sad that I go so far away. And we didn't know anything about Japan, you see. And of course, the other relatives, I mean aunts and uncles, and they came and told my mother, how can you, allow that? And oh my golly, finally I was so upset. I said, well, I will marry him and I will be happy without you.
The large Catholic church where the ceremony was held was filled to capacity. As for Waltraud's mother's relatives, they were all there. Only 4 months after the wedding, a cable arrived asking the newlyweds to return to Japan. When they arrived in Nagoya, the entire family, except for Suzuki's parents, was at the station to welcome them. Waltraud, who didn't know a word of Japanese, just tried to smile. The Japan the Suzukis returned to was deep in economic depression. Almost simultaneously, Suzuki's mother died. His father lost his money in the great stock market crash of 1929, and virtually their entire world collapsed. Throughout the Depression, Suzuki earned a modest living through music. He formed a respected family quartet and would tour with his brothers. He gave violin lessons to young students, and like the cultural ambassadors of the Meiji era, he shared his knowledge of Western music with all of Japan. It was during this period, before World War II, that Suzuki would first identify the educational principles that would become the central focus of his life. The now worldwide depression shattered Japan's fragile democratic institutions, and by 1931 convinced that prosperity depended on controlling the resources and markets of China and Southeast Asia, Japan's military leaders would seize Manchuria, ravage Shanghai, and would covet the world. The only remaining obstacle to Japan's drive for control over all of Asia was the United States. To destroy this obstacle, on December the 7th, 1941, Japanese forces attacked Pearl Harbor. Finally, August of 1945, the world's first atomic bomb was dropped on Hiroshima, and then again on Nagasaki. 200,000 people were killed in a moment. Japan unconditionally surrenders. Rubble, twisted metal punctuated the desolate urban landscape of post-war Japan. But with quiet determination, and of all things, aided by her enemy, the United States, the Japanese people began the seemingly impossible task of rebuilding. The war was over, but not the problems. Suzuki had become ill from poor nutrition during the war, and he went to Matsumoto, a remote mountain village, to recuperate while Waltraud moved to Yokohama to work at the American Red Cross. In Matsumoto, Suzuki was offered a place to start a music school. But he declared,
I am not interested in doing repair work on people who can play already. What I want to try is infant education. I want to teach small children not to turn out geniuses, but through violin playing to extend the child's ability. In very young children, Suzuki recognized hope for his country and for humanity. He saw an opportunity to start fresh, not on the repair of previously learned mistakes, but on the blank pages of innocent young minds. His approach to talent education would come from that single, unforgettable insight he had before the war when he realized every Japanese child speaks Japanese. Speaking fluent Japanese requires a very high ability, but a 6-year-old has already learned 3,000 words and speaks with greatest ease. In that moment, Suzuki realized that born within every child was an extraordinary capacity to learn a universe of knowledge, language, mathematics, music. If he could find a way to unlock their potential, he could bring to all children a way to help them fulfill that potential. Suzuki exclaimed, "What a wonderful discovery it was for me that day! My study of man and talent, as well as my quest for the mother tongue approach to music, began." Suzuki's first students were very young. In 1934, his little pupils gave their first public performance. 4-year-old Koji Toyoda played Dvorak's Humoresque to an amazed audience. The media focused on the exceptional virtuosity of these young pupils with headlines like, "Genius is revealed." Suzuki felt that missed the point. He said, "All children can learn. In our school, they are accepted on their willingness to participate. We have no entrance exams." During the war, music studies were interrupted. Koji Toyoda and his family left Tokyo to escape the bombing, but when the war was over, Suzuki learned that Koji's parents had been killed. Going to great lengths to find the boy, the Suzukis took Koji, now a teenager, home and made him a part of their family.
That's a very difficult time with war. I lost my father and I lost the contact in this period. And Dr. Suzuki asked whole Japan to look after me. And somebody had heard that and informed me about that. So I went to his home, and here, of course, he became like my father.
Koji would follow in his teacher's footsteps to study in Berlin and would later go on to become concertmaster of the Berlin Radio Symphony Orchestra.
Dr. Suzuki has greatness of spirit. That means, thanks to his idea, every children are gifted to do something wonderful. And he believed that, and he gave us all to believe it. So you see, there are many, many good violinists, many, many good musicians, and that's a great, great contribution.
Waltraud has been with Shinichi through sickness and health and through many painful separations during the war, and he remains to this day her ideal.
He was the most wonderful person I can think of. And he still is. He never changed. And this is, you know, I went through 2 wars, through world wars, and I have seen people change so much. I mean, you think, oh, that's a very nice person. And then during the war, they are just the opposite, you know. But Suzuki never changed. He was and is a wonderful person.
During the early years of the talent education movement, Waltraud Suzuki acted as her husband's secretary and personal assistant. She was among the first to envision the impact the Suzuki method would have worldwide. It was through her insistence that John Kendall, the first American to visit Suzuki, was invited to journey to Japan to witness the Suzuki method firsthand.
I always came on Saturday, Sunday, and then I found a stack of letters here, unopened, you see. And I see all from the same person, from Professor Kendall. And I said, what's all this? So Suzuki said, oh, I read only one letter, and he wants to come. I said, now, and? Did you answer? He said, no. So I opened all the letters, you see, and always, why don't I ever get an answer? Is it possible to come? I said, my God. So I said, what do you think? He wants to come. He says, all right, then he can come. So I wrote, you're welcome to come. And he came. Then Professor Kendall, he was so amazed, He said, I don't think the American mothers will do that. I said, I think they will, because every mother wants the best for her child. So why don't you first try it and then say something?
Following his return trip from Japan in 1959, Kendall wrote a paper on talent education in the Bach and Presser Foundation report. In the report, Kendall said, there are nearly 75 teachers, 4,500 students in approximately 45 different centers in Japan. Probably 8,000 students who have studied or who are presently studying have been part of the talent education movement. The primary purpose of talent education is not to train artists, but to give all children the opportunity to develop the amazing potential which is illustrated in their ability to learn their mother tongue. In 1964, Suzuki made his first visit to the United States. A concert tour was organized to bring 10 young students to America. The children were chosen not for their virtuosity, but for their availability.
I was a professor of music at the University of Tennessee, and I picked up the international musician, and I saw this picture of the great crowd of Japanese boys and girls, small ones, playing the Bach double concerto, and I thought, I wonder what that sounded like, but that sounded horrible. So I went to the 1964 Music Educators Conference, in which they had invited Suzuki to bring 10 children over to perform. And then when those children played, I just said, we've got to find out all that we can about this.
He had a little 7-year-old, for instance, get up and play Veracini Sonata, and I happened to be playing the Veracini Sonata myself on recitals that year, and I listened in amazement, thinking she's playing that almost as well as I am, and she's 7 years old, and I haven't a child I've ever taught who could do this.
Their tone was so magnificent. A great lump came in my throat because it was so, even to think about it, it sort of gives one a chills, because there just never had been anything like that. If it hadn't been for Dr. Suzuki, I never would have had the opportunity of seeing what wonderful things children can do.
The bow flies away, the mother picks it up.
This was how Suzuki described the essence of early talent education. All children whose families were willing to invest their time and effort in a better future for them could be educated to have a noble mind and splendid ability.
I think one of the most important things that he has done up to this point is give us the insight that every child can learn. So many times we say that, that child, well, they have a problem, they can't do this, but every child can, and he's proven it with children who are handicapped, with unbelievable handicaps.
Suzuki found proof of his beliefs in a 6-year-old girl who had suffered from infantile paralysis.
She couldn't hold the bow for very long before her right arm and hand would twitch violently and the bow would fly out of her hand. The bow flies away. The mother picks it up.
Within 6 months, through the infinite patience of the mother and the teacher, The child was able to play Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star all the way through, and as she gained control of her right side, gradually she could move normally. As a thalidomide baby with stunted fingers on her left hand, Mika Maki's future seemed bleak. At just 2.5 years old, her life was already burdened by the stigma Japanese society had placed on her unfortunate disability. On a visit to observe her older sister's violin lesson, Mika accidentally met Dr. Suzuki. Suzuki walked her into Miss Mori's classroom and said, "Please, take care of this child. Make her great."
Of course, in the beginning it was hard since I was not able to use my arm from the time I was born. I couldn't even hold a bowl of rice or a can of juice. I didn't have any strength in my hand, so of course I couldn't hold the bow.
I remember one time while Mika and her mother were commuting to our school, the bus suddenly jolted. While holding a can of orange juice, she suddenly switched it to her left hand. Before then, she couldn't have held the can because the muscles in her arm were so weak. The muscles were so weak. But now she could grab the can. In the bus, she said she drank the juice right then. When the bus jolted, she must have held on with her right hand, leaving only the left hand free. I heard that she and her mother cried, holding each other on the bus. Isn't it wonderful? You can use your left hand. When I heard this story, I was also pleased. I didn't really intend to make her left hand stronger, but because she was practicing her bowing, she developed strength.
The biggest change in my life was being able to use my left hand freely. Emotionally and psychologically, I was always hiding my hand in front of people. I spent much of the time crying. But Miss Mori told me that if I cry all the time, the sound of the violin would reflect my sorrow. Since then, I began to laugh more often. I stopped hiding my hand and began to use it naturally. Also, things I thought I couldn't do before, by practicing, by repeating them over and over, like the violin. I proved to myself that I could accomplish anything.
Dr. Suzuki is fond of saying that his method is for the good of all children.
As far as I know, Suzuki never studied psychology formally, and yet he has a kind of intuitive understanding of kids, which I find very, very unusual. He arrived at something which, on the one hand, really respected children for who they are, didn't try to make them into something else, but yet on the other hand, really got them to appreciate and to perform music in a way which we who don't know about Suzuki might not have thought was possible.
He respects the person. He recognizes what they have inside, and he tries to bring it out. And he goes about it whichever way, communication-wise, psychology, his psychology of teaching, just watching him teach many different people. He just switches the right avenue for each individual person, and they all respond to him.
He can convey things to the children and get results in just a really magical way. And I think his teaching is effective not just in that he can get these magnificent results, he gives them something for keeps. And it really becomes, in a way, a life-changing or very momentous occasion.
One of the first programs to teach the Suzuki method in the United States was a New York State grant project called Super.
The summer of '66, we got $30,000 from the National Endowment and from the New York State Council of the Arts. And we named the project Project Super. SU stood for Suzuki, of course. P was for Penfield, one of our quite affluent suburbs. E was Eastman, and R was Rochester. So from all these areas, teachers were called and asked if they would like to participate in this experiment. Because one of the objectives of this project was to see if it was feasible in several different situations, that is, in the affluent suburbs at Eastman, which was like conservatory type of school that drew students from every area, and also in the Rochester public schools. So our adventures began, and of course they were very exciting, and the impact was interesting. It seemed to gather force.
After the American String Teachers Association brought the first Suzuki children to the United States in 1964, the Suzuki method spread rapidly. In 1971, the Suzuki Association of the Americas was formed. It included all of the Western Hemisphere. In 1975, the first international conference took place in Hawaii. A series of international meetings followed with the countries of Japan, the United States, Canada, Germany, Australia, Korea, and Ireland, serving as hosts to the Suzuki Method World Conventions.
The SAA's prime purpose has been to bring Suzuki people together, to sponsor things for Suzuki teachers and parents and children, and to develop more teachers to offer training, and to try to raise the standards of excellence in teaching.
It's probably our prime focus is the development of teachers. And now we're at a point where we want to create recognition of what is a Suzuki teacher. And so we want to create a very highly professional organization that reaches teachers in organizations at a local level, a state level, a regional level, a national level, and the International Suzuki Association.
At the 1983 Matsumoto Conference, the ISA, the International Suzuki Association, was formed. In 1991, the ISA became the sponsor of the conferences. Dr. Suzuki has been a very strong influence at all world meetings. After World War II, America viewed Japan as a source for cheap miniaturized goods and inexpensive cameras. However, imitation would soon give way to innovation, and Japan would make major strides in the fields of electronics and automotive manufacturing. And imitation was considered an early step toward creative development.
Everything we know about the mind of the young child is the young child likes to imitate, likes to get better, and I think it's a perfectly valid approach. I would not dismiss any approach just because it has a fair amount of imitation in it.
In the Western civilization, the idea of copying has gotten a bad name over the years. But in all honesty, in the Renaissance, in different art forms, in ballet, in art, copying was a means, what was part of the process.
Painter went to the Louvre Museum and copied the great paintings. That is the starting of studying arts, don't you think? Yeah. The Suzuki method is the same thing. If we don't copy the great paintings, great music, you know, we can't make real music based on that foundation.
The impressive mass performances of hundreds of children has spurred much criticism from traditional music teachers. Traditionalists often describe the playing of Suzuki students as robotic, mechanically correct, but lacking true musical feeling.
We probably emphasize individual interpretation and expression more in the West than in a more Confucian kind of society. But my observation of Suzuki is that one of the most important lessons is that this is a realm in which feeling is appropriate. I've always thought it was very weird in school that we put kids in individual seats and we penalize them for working together, when in the workplace, that's certainly, you want people to be able to work together cooperatively. And I think that Suzuki has been very appropriate in seeing how much of the learning really does take place when you have a wide group.
We mustn't forget one fundamental concept here, and that is we are in the communication business, first and foremost. Music is a unique form of communicating. And so the study of music really is the study of how to translate the language of music, which everyone responds to, and incorporate them into yourself in a way that someone else can feel them on a musical level. And that's a very sophisticated learning process. The giants have an ability to communicate on a spiritual level, to help one through this translation process. One such person was Dr. Suzuki himself.
Mass concerts have also been equated with mass production. Yes, Suzuki often uses group lessons to help children learn by example, but training is still individual in the classroom and at home.
I believe that the heart of Suzuki instruction is individual. Dr. Suzuki believes very much in the individual child's ability, in not measuring that child against any other child. Your best yardstick for measurement is that child himself or herself. The instruction even has its own support system. The parent, who is the home teacher, is right there in that private lesson situation, so that can hardly be anything I can think of that's more individual. The advantage for the children of playing together in groups is the support they get from one another and the fun that they have. This repetition, whether it's performance or a group class, is not the heart of their instruction, but it allows permanence through exercise. You get the instruction yourself, but you're seeing somebody else get taught, and you're hearing these ideas being processed, and you see how it happens for them. And this accumulates into a bank of experience that you haven't lived long enough to have done that many times yourself. All those things take seed, and then with the watering of the individual instruction, they begin to grow, and pretty soon they've bloomed, and you have something wonderful.
One final misconception is that the Suzuki children don't read music. Instead of etudes and scales, Suzuki studies begin with real music. Students are taught to play first and then to read music once the playing skill has been established.
A lot of traditional teachers don't understand much about Suzuki method, and they feel that the kids never learn to read music. That's the biggest criticism. I would say to them that yes, children do learn to read music and they become excellent readers. We just wait until they're reading ready. We don't start them reading music at age 4 because they're not ready. They don't understand symbolism on paper.
We in this country were so excited about the value of the ear training that Dr. Suzuki's approach allows, that perhaps we did make errors in our timing, not in what we did, but in the timing.
I remember one of my own children, we delayed his reading longer than we should have, and so he was put in an orchestra in 7th grade, like in 3rd violins, because he couldn't read that well. But he was concertmaster by Christmas. And I said, I'm sorry you went through that. And he said, oh, it's all right. He said, I'll tell you one thing. It's a lot easier to learn to read than it is to play the violin.
Western teachers have been quick to add music reading and theory to the Suzuki curriculum. The required technical training is inherent in the Suzuki violin repertoire through a system of 10 instructional books. This step-by-step method has been adapted for the piano, viola, cello, flute, harp, guitar, bass, and recorder. The basic tenets of the mother tongue method differ from traditional methods on a number of levels. Unlike methods which often wait until the age of 9 before training begins, The Suzuki method is known for the enormous progress which occurs with students as young as 2 and 3.
Well, one of the things we know now from lots of research is that the human brain is extremely flexible in the first months and years of life, and the kinds of connections that can be made, and even the number of connections that can be made, is integrally tied to the richness of the experience that the organism has. So what a rich kind of bathing, which is the way I think about Suzuki and music, is in the early years of life, is it's sort of a daily tonic for the nervous system, and that investment in early age is very, very profound.
Suzuki intuitively knew that 50 years ago, and that comes about if the attitudes are developed in the first 3 years of life. So that's why I feel it is so important that we look beyond what has happened in the Suzuki music field and take these ideas into the whole child's education.
All Suzuki students begin their training by learning the international bow. This signals the beginning of the lesson and demonstrates respect between the teacher and the student. The child is then taught to stand quietly and focused through a full chorus of Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. By the time Suzuki students have studied for several years, they have memorized 2 or 3 hours of music, and the numerous pieces are refined and remain at the students' fingertips.
That's a low sound. Yeah, let me hear it.
In traditional instruction, ear training is often delayed until the child is fluent in musical notation, but the Suzuki method teaches pitch recognition and rhythm from the very first lesson.
I think it's the most important thing, the training of the listening, of learning how to listen to music and how to listen to yourself. And I think having a lot of ear training early on in music lessons is very good, because we need to learn to listen, not only to other people, but we need to learn to listen to ourselves, so that what we're playing is what we mean from inside.
A strings, go.
Do I do now? Yeah, go ahead.
Though most educators agree that introducing music into the environment at infancy is a positive gesture, Suzuki equates early exposure to music as planting the seed of ability. Parental involvement in this environment further differentiates the Suzuki method from traditional thinking.
It's a total three-way proposition between the teacher and the parent and the student, and that gives a lot of strength to it. And it also gives a uniqueness to this movement which is not always there in traditional teaching. My colleagues used to say, if you could just keep those parents out of this, I might be able to teach the kid. And that's a way of thinking about it which is quite inimical to our approach, which is you get everybody involved in a common purpose.
Well, what it was, I mean, our life was what Suzuki is talking about is music from before birth and after birth, and I saw it happen. I didn't ever think of being any different, but this must have been in about 62. Bill, he would have been 3 years old, and his little brother would have been 1, and they were watching Captain Kangaroo in the living room, and I was working in the kitchen, and all of a sudden I heard all this yelling and come quick, and so I came in and I saw this original film from Japan, and I had been a traditional teacher for quite a while by this time, and so then it was like like a James Bond movie, being a spy, trying to find out how to find out about this method.
From the ages of about 5 to 8, I suppose, it was something fun to do. I did that. I also went out in the backyard and played ball and broke windows and all the other things that kids do. I did enjoy the sound, and also I think the social aspect of it, the positive approach, encouragement and gentility, if you will, is something that I think my parents related to very well, not only as music teachers, but in parenting.
I think one of the leading things that makes the Suzuki method different and so successful is the many ways it motivates the child. And there can be no better motivation than knowing that your parents think that you're really doing something wonderful.
And of course that's shaped my life.
The guiding principle of talent education is character first, then ability. The goal is not to create a professional musician, but to create a better human being.
I feel that any parent involved with what their child does in the nurturing stages keeps them growing as a person. As a teacher, that makes my job much easier to know that the child is hopefully working on what they should work on at home and then come back to the lesson prepared. One of my roles at the beginning of the year is to make it clear to their parent that they may not have musical experience, but they can still take on this project as long as they have time to spend with their child at home. And I think that's something we still keep working on because people are so involved and overworked that finding time, quality time to work with their children is one of my primary goals as a teacher. Right now, just think about you and the chair.
Being the type of child my daughter is, it makes me have to look at our relationship and the struggles that I see with us. When we're having struggles with the cello, we're usually struggling outside of there. So for me, it teaches me a lot about myself, and it makes me have to be more flexible. I look at it in several different ways. First of all, what I think it does is help her to be disciplined, and I think she really needs that. And I think most children need to learn that there's something in life you consistently have to do. And it also teaches them that to be good at something, many times you can become good by simply repeating it over and over. And so to me, I don't care if she plays in the symphony orchestra. I mean, that's one of her goals among many other ones. But to me, if she can just play for relaxation when she's older, or play for her own pleasure, or play if she has children for them, it would be well worth it.
Suzuki says, everyone concerned with the development of the child must be of one mind and one spirit. The child will absorb something of the feeling, grow to be more feeling adults, and consequently make a kinder and better world within his or her reach.
Music is like Bible. Musicians are missionary. Dr. Suzuki must have been acting as a great missionary to convey God's word.
This is an extraordinary man, and we mustn't forget Dr. Suzuki, the man himself, this extraordinarily charming, grand communicator. There is no question when you're in his presence that you're in the presence of a great man. It's the communication that was the genesis of this whole movement, to communicate with young people in a war-torn country, to do something with their parents that would bond them and make their world a little bit more beautiful. That's what it's all about, and that's what must prevail.
Pablo Casals was 75 when he went to Japan to hear the Suzuki students play. He said, "Music must serve a purpose. It must be a part of something larger than itself, a part of humanity." It is this spirituality that Dr. Shinichi Suzuki seeks to bring to the world. To quote him, "When the human race created the culture of speech and writing, it also produced the sublime culture called music. It is a language that goes beyond speech and letters, a living art that is almost mystical." Yes. Bach, Mozart, Beethoven live clearly and palpably in their music and speak forcibly to us, purifying us, refining us, and awakening in us the highest joy and emotion. It was Mozart who taught me to know perfect love, truth, goodness, beauty. He left me a legacy. In his place, I am to further the happiness of all children. He has shown me the immortal light. Mozart says to me, Life is sad, yes, but there is love. Let us go along together and comfort one another. Through the words of Issa, an 18th century Japanese poet, I understand Mozart ever more clearly. In one of his poems, Issa wrote, "Be it as it may, all my life is in your hands, now at the end of year. Though I am aware evening bells my curfew toll, I enjoy the cool."